So this morning I normally do my live meditation at 10, but we received word yesterday that my husband's father passed, and he passed peacefully, which was a blessing. He was old, and he lived a very privileged, fortunate life. And I just want to share a couple of stories, and then I will invite you to take the time today to practice the Buddhist contemplative exercise of impermanence. And I will explain that in a minute or two. But first I wanted to share two really cool stories about Pat's dad, Dan. So Dan loved his family big time. And when one of the neatest things that I found after I met Patrick was hearing about all these stories of how Dan and his wife Muriel would bring their children, and they had 7. They would bring their children on big ski trips. They traveled. They loved to travel, but one of the big things they did together was ski. And so growing up, my husband, traveled the world with his family, going to the greatest places to ski. And they, of course, had many, many wonderful memories together. And then, of course, as their 7 children grew up and married and had families, we were all included in that. So we could go away to Italy or Austria or somewhere in the state, in Montana or British Columbia, and we'd be in a massive house with 20, 25 people, 30 people, sharing dinners at night and breakfasts and lunch on the hill and just all sorts of nonsense, but really having amazing family times, great opportunities to connect. And so I always appreciate that about Dan. And the second thing, which I think is brilliant, is that one of Pat's younger sisters just drove across the country with her family to try and make it home in time to see her dad before he died. And because of COVID, the facility he was in, of course, was on lockdown, and so they were not allowed to go in. So Catherine had driven from British Columbia to Ontario in 3 days. So yesterday morning, she goes with her siblings, a couple of her siblings, and they're standing outside the window of Dan's room. And they hear Dan, and he's yelling and yelling because he can't find his glasses. And so a hospital worker heard that a maintenance person actually heard Dan yelling and poked his head in the room and told Dan that his glasses were in his pocket and he could find them, and he did. And meanwhile, outside of his window are his children yelling at him, trying to get his attention, talking to him. And as soon as he got his glasses on, as soon as he put on his reading glasses, he pulled up the paper and he never looked out the window again at his kids who were there to say goodbye to him. And it was so typical Dan, because he was a voracious reader of newspapers, and he read 2 to 3 newspapers a day. So it was just kind of a crazy Dan Murphy kind of thing that, whatever, you're out there, I know you're my kids and you want to talk to me, but I've got a newspaper to read. So they end up leaving, and Dan reads his newspaper. Muriel is there, his wife. He eats his soup for lunch. Muriel goes back to her home, and Dan passes peacefully. So I wanted to leave you with that kind of fun story, and introduce the concept, the Buddhist concept of impermanence. And it is a contemplative exercise. And to begin this type of meditation, you start very slowly. For instance, you would meditate on the impermanence of, say, nature, the cycles of nature, plants, how they thrive and some die. And then as you get more established and comfortable in the practice of meeting head on, looking, investigating the concept of impermanence, you become more comfortable and at ease in holding space for those things and people that we lose. So for me, I felt like I had this concept delivered to me very early in life. I really felt a loss without my parents, to have been parented by them. And then things like when the house blew up, and things that, literally things that I had for 20, 30 years that were precious to me had been destroyed. And just sort of recognizing that, well, you know what, that cookie jar that was my grandma's was really important to me, but what was more important was that relationship that I had with her. And then it allowed me to look more closely at the times that I had had brushes with death. And with the explosion in particular, I had a very strong out-of-body experience, and I've had a couple of those since then. And it allowed me to look even closer to my own mortality. And coupled with the fact with my head injury, when the prognosis was that I would meet early onset dementia, I would probably be in a facility right now, I had to come to terms with that. And once I allowed myself to sit with that and not fight it, there was great freedom and unbelievable peace. So I won't know until, I'm gone, when or if I will enter into early onset dementia, or how I leave this earth. But establishing this comfort with recognizing the natural order of the world, which is impermanence, which is the cycle of birth and death and birth and death. And one final little thought is that I love in Eastern wisdom traditions is that you don't say death, dead. You say, my friend, or so-and-so has left their body, has shed their body. A very, very strong understanding and core belief that what is real and true is actually the self, the soul, and that never dies. So we are just heading off now to say our farewell to Dan and spend a little bit of time outside with his family sharing some stories. So I leave that with you. When it's available, when you feel comfortable, take those moments to contemplate our impermanence, and also to take the time to hold in your heart these are memories of the people in your life that have made you who you are. So, be well. I'll see you tomorrow, God willing. And if not, it's okay. Namaste.